when you're able to flip this idea that working that hard is miserable and instead be grateful that you have this job that calls you to be something you never thought was possible, your perspective starts to change. What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Actually Good Coffee Podcast, a show where I talk about all things coffee related, all while drinking a cup of coffee. Today I'm drinking a new single origin by Maiden Coffee. It is a Panama origin. It has notes of nutmeg, brown sugar, and cranberry. It is a great single origin to try if you have never gotten into single origin coffee before. And I would confirm the flavor notes that I was talking about before, but I was so excited to drink it that I actually burned the shit out of my mouth trying to take the first sip. But if anything, that's a good sign. Last week, we sold 545 pounds of coffee. If we're looking at last year's same week, we sold 515 pounds of coffee. So 30 pounds more than the years previous. But for whatever reason, every time I'm not able to hit that 615 pound average per week that we did in 2023, I don't feel fulfilled. So that's my own personal thing. Let's move on to today's topic. The topic for today's episode is a quote that seems to connect with more and more of the things that I find myself doing. And that quote is, "Exhaustion is the gift of a hard day's work." When I was growing up, I grew up in Spring Lake, New Jersey. It was a very upper middle class town. I was spoiled. There's no question about that. I had 5 older siblings and my father did well for himself. I was never, that good at school. I didn't really push myself. I played sports, but I was never like the best athlete. So the way that I would rectify my upbringing, in a sense, I would do it through my work ethic. I worked as a landscaper for the first few years of actually having a job. I actually worked construction too as I got older. A lot of the guys that I worked with were actually very lazy, just had no work ethic and a lot of pride and not much motivation to do well. What I would do is kind of set that as a standard, and even though it wasn't much of a standard to begin with, I would just try to work harder than these guys. And even being 14, 15, 16, I would just work my ass off to rectify the fact that I felt so given so much in so many other areas. This was like my way that I could sort of prove that maybe it's worth something. As I got older, I went to college for about 3 months. At the time, my sister got diagnosed with cancer, and I really realized that I didn't enjoy my school experience. So I just felt it was a good time to come home, and I just started working again. I got a job at this breakfast spot in Asbury called Cardinal. If you don't know Cardinal, you've probably never been to Asbury Park before. And this is a place where that same idea. I felt like I had this standard of working hard, but the bar just was too low. I was at the time living with my father, and I was like working out. I thought I was like the man, and I got humbled pretty quick. It was my first job within the restaurant industry, so I had no prior experience to working in restaurants up until this point. And everyone there, it was like you do everything. You honestly do a little bit of everything there. And at the time, I was actually looking to get a job at this place called Porta because they had this whole club thing going on. I was looking to still stay in the music industry in some aspects, so I was looking into getting into DJing possibly. And I remember talking to my manager one day, and I said, "Listen, is there any way that you could get me a job at this place, Porta?" And she basically made this agreement with me that if I could work my ass off for the next 6 months, she'd feel confident in putting in a good word for me, because that's kind of like the whole dynamic, is you're not going to put in a word for somebody that doesn't work hard, because then that just reflects poorly on you. So that's what I did. For the rest of my time that I spent at Cardinal, I did all the uncomfortable tasks that I didn't feel comfortable doing, like talking to customers or answering phone calls, which again doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but for me at the time that was a pretty big deal. I remember getting a call actually one time. Somebody called that asked if they could cater for one of their events that they had going on, and the only thing I got was their first name. So I wrote down their first name. I went back and I talked to my boss at the time, one of the owners, Grace, and I remember giving her the note, and she looked at it, and I'm pretty sure the exact words were like, "What the fuck is this?" And I just kind of realized at that point, I don't know why it was so pivotal, but I was like, man, I cannot just get away with being that like idiot kid that's like funny and just gets away with like this stupid humor anymore. Like I'm 18 and I have no degree. I actually have to start trying and like make myself worthwhile. And again, it was just really starting to push myself to this point where I was like, I'm going to try at this as hard as I can. Fast forward a couple years, I was now working at Porta. I got the job. I started working as a busser, got promoted to barback, and then eventually bartender. But if you don't know what barback does at a job or at any restaurant, it's like the work mule for every single task. I remember actually working as a barback, and some shifts I'd have to work straight through. So I would work, Friday night, 5 p.m. till 3 a.m., go to bed, wake up, go back to work, get to work at around 9 a.m., work again till about 3 to 4 a.m. sometimes. Go back home, or actually go back to my friend's house, John, who I was living with at the time. I would go to bed, wake up at around 7 to 8 in the morning, get back to work at 9 a.m. on Sunday, work again till 5 to 6, 7, sometimes 8 at night. And by the end of it, I would feel like a zombie. Like my brain, I couldn't even comprehend how tired I was. But that feeling of just complete exhaustion, knowing that there's nothing else that you could do to have worked harder, was one of the best feelings I've ever felt. It was for the first time. I was actually not for the first time, but for the most crucial time in my life where I realized that like this is the point where I cannot work any harder. Like I found that limit for me. And again, that only came within working about 35 hours total. But when you work 35 hours straight with almost no sleep, and I'm sure people are able to do this for maybe even a week, and you know what, maybe if I had to, I probably was able to, but at that time for me, I'd never been able to do something like that where it was just such a nonstop, no break, no sleep, and just get the job done no matter what way you can. It was like the most challenging thing for me that I've done at that time. And again, it's not even that it was like I was miserable from doing it. I was so physically and mentally exhausted from it, but it wasn't a bad feeling by any means. And I think I see a lot of people go wrong with whatever job that they're working, is that when you're able to flip this idea that working that hard is miserable and instead be grateful that you have this job that calls you to be something you never thought was possible, your perspective starts to change on this. Like your miserable job that you hate now becomes something that you can be grateful that you have a reason to get up for every single morning and a source of income to support yourself or your family with. It's not this mundane task that you have to do every single day because you don't know what else to do. It's about this perspective, and I found that when I was able to push myself to these limits that I never thought was possible. So again, take with that what you will. Thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.